Okay, so let us introduce ourselves, or rather let me introduce everyone. This is Max Huffman. Max is a professor of law at Indiana University School of Law, McKinney School of Law. And we have Jeani Young, who is our online instructional designer. And she's with the main campus that does all this online designing. And I am Cynthia Adams, and friend back there from other campuses, clinical professor of law at IU, Robert H. McKinney School. So, just real briefly, before we get started, I want to impart to you what it is we exactly do in our capacities at the university. Max teaches doctrinal commercial law and corporate law courses. He just rolled out an online course. It's a seminar course in the spring. I want to make sure I get this right. Comparative and International Competition Law. So he just rolled that out this last spring. I teach primarily transactional skills courses. And in that regard, I have done a hybrid course in negotiations and international negotiations, which I rolled out in 2014. And I'm doing a fully online course that I'm rolling out in fall of this year in basic contract drafting. Now, aside from that, Max and I both are chair of committees at our school that are directly involved in curriculum development. Max is chair of the Teaching and Online Learning Committee, Education Committee. And I am chair of the Academic Affairs Committee. So we've had a lot of collaboration this last year about getting courses online and whatnot. Jeani is my partner in crime, at least my partner in crime, for a lot of what I've been doing online. I refer to her as sort of my hybrid Santa Claus and Scotty on the Enterprise, okay? So I sit down with her and I give her my wish list of what I'd like to do, and she sort of helps me out with giving some thought to that, and Scotty, what kind of way in which I can make that happen in an engaging, interactive way online. So, what we're planning to do today is we are going to share with you what we do to make our courses, our online courses, interactive, but we're also going to make this interactive with you in the sense that we want to hear from you and what thoughts and ideas of what you are doing as well. So, to get started, I'll turn it over to Jeani.
Isn't it me?
Oh, I'm sorry, Max.
All right. Hey, so first, the title. This is the last Doctor Who reference you will see in this presentation. I've seen the show once. I didn't like it that much. My wife in particular doesn't like it. Feel free to leave. I'm free to leave. But to be fair, right?
I have a few Doctor Who references.
Once we learned that these sessions were voted on to get on the menu here at Kelly, and we saw what everybody else was titling their courses, these exciting things about, fire burning and like people jumping through windows, we thought we got to come up with something exciting and modern, and so we pulled out Doctor Who. But that's the end of it. So the second point about interactivity is key. If we're going to talk about interactivity in course design, we should be doing interactivity in the classroom. So the first question to get started on that is, who's teaching online, or supporting teaching online, or engaged in teaching online, or watches teaching online, or cares about teaching online, or knows what teaching online means? Good, all right, we got everybody. Okay, when we talk about teaching online, are you thinking synchronous, like it is going on live at the same time as being streamed and someone's receiving it? Hands in the air if so. That's what we do. Okay. Both. Is it asynchronous? Are you thinking like, you're putting some material up, you are guiding the students through it, you are, there's some recorded lecture capture that may go on that's being available to students, there's some readings assigned, there are quizzes, there are discussion boards, some combination of the two. So here's the question, if we can do it. Is there a way to form a judgment as to whether synchronous or asynchronous is better? And then we can just stop talking now and go on and have brownies outside. Is anybody willing to vote that synchronous is obviously better? Anybody want to say asynchronous is obviously better? You can't, right? Oh, so we do. We do it.
Yes.
Which one? Asynchronous?
Asynchronous.
Good. So why?
Because what's the point
of doing distance education if you have to get them all together in the same spot at the same time. And I've got somebody that's in Hawaii, and I've got somebody that's in the Philippines. What's the point?
Okay, so when you think about why you put the program together, half of the rationale tends to be flexibility, right? When I get my student evaluations back, and I just did from the first course, by the way, I was incredibly gratified with how positive they were. I say that not to talk about myself, but to talk about really the work of Jeani and her colleagues in design. The students love the flexibility. We at McKinney, where I teach, have a part-time program. A lot of my students are part-time students. We also were able to open it to students at other schools who are in different time zones or in cross-national borders. And so you gain something from asynchronous that synchronous does not get you. But there was a different view on this.
No, same thing. No, asynchronous assumes that it's recorded so you can watch it multiple times.
Okay, so the fact that the material is there and repeatedly accessible.
Yeah.
Right, students can sort of cycle back through it. In fact, you do see that when you look back at most learning management systems will record student use of the learning management system, and you can see the students going back, and we're seeing video counts, video watch counts, like 3 times per video you put up. The students are doing this repeatedly and absorbing the material, going back and over. You can't do that synchronously. You can't do that live. The students can't get your lecture 3 times over. So there were benefits that asynchronous brings that are tough to get with synchronous. Still, go back to the original point. I don't think you can say a priori one is better than the other. I don't think you can say you must have a synchronous class or you must have an asynchronous class. I do think it is a design choice you've got to make when putting together your course. It's important to think about the usefulness of each. The way I think about it, because I'm going to jump on board with the 2 people who said we like asynchronous and we're willing to stand up and be heard on that. When I think about the design process, and again, this all comes from Jeani in her office, to me everything is outcome driven. Right? Well, what outcome are you trying to get from the course? And when I think about the outcome of the way in which the students receive the material, the outcome I might be trying to accomplish, I have a hard time articulating an outcome that a synchronous meeting meets. In other words, what learning outcome is served by students showing up at the same time in the same place, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed all at the same time?
The interaction between the students. If you're in a distance class, you have the opportunity at the time that you're learning something to ask questions and interact with other people in the course and the professor.
Okay, so there was exactly this question, right? Can we achieve that same interaction asynchronously? Because if we can't, you're right. There clearly is a team aspect to this.
And I think she hit it. It's the professor's interaction. Because I'm now in my 2nd online master's program, not law, and the professors are extremely lazy when they teach online. And they are not participating in the discussions. They're not providing any kind of feedback to the students. And you know, as somebody who designs online classes, it's really helpful for me to be a student in these classes, because I can see what I don't like, and when I get frustrated and I complain to the school about the teachers because they're not participating in class that I paid for.
So am I not being receptive to the comment if I say that, to me, your comment turns on this point that professors are lazy? It seems to me that you could get over that. The professor did it well, right? Yeah. So there is an interactivity benefit. Yeah. There is a question, are the professors going to do their jobs in achieving interactivity? By the way, none of us are naive anymore in the modern day, right? It is every bit as harder or harder to run this course online as it is to do a law.
Harder.
And I think harder to do asynchronously than it is to do synchronously. For the same reason, right? Because you have to actually go out and engage and not be lazy about it. Absolutely. So we're left with this question, can we achieve the kind of interactivity with the asynchronous experience? To my view, there is probably, I think we get more interactivity the way that we're designing it. I'm going to leave this to Jeani here to talk more about the design process as we get into that. I think we end up getting more interactivity. And again, I'm sort of stuck with, once we achieve that, I'm not sure what synchronous gives us as a learning objective, as an outcome. One might say that there is an outcome that you have to show up to work on time every day. And that is a real something you're supposed to do in the profession of law, I think, to some degree. But for the most part, my view of how I engage with the law, both as a professional and as a teacher and even back as a student, tends to be a lot of sort of self-starting. And asynchronous teaching is a self-starter's model of teaching. I think that you can teach self-starting through the asynchronous process. Again, so long as you are not lazy, you build in the interactivity, that really should get off the stage.
I would like to mention that talking about like not, or are you talking about not being lazy for the students who can't do a self-starting kind of thing, or for the professors and interacting with them?
Talking about the professor.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Both. Don't
Okay.
really both.
Yeah, because I know people that are pretty severely ADHD that asynchronous doesn't work the best for them. And synchronous, while they might be late to the class, tends to work better as their learning platform.
That's a useful comment, thank you. So particularly in the circumstance of an ADHD style, yeah.
Not all ADHD people, but some of them.
And generally speaking, just to tag on to that, even though it's kind of to the side of what we're doing, online courses in any mode are not going to be appropriate for everybody. I mean, there are people who really need to be in that classroom, in the emotional context of that classroom, to really be at their best. And there are other people who prefer not to be in that kind of a setting. So people do tend to self-select. So it's not going to be something that's going to be a one-size-fits-all. There's not, that's never going to exist in any format or any mode. So it's my bit
to the right
here. Okay. Okay. It's a Mac. I'm yeah. It's a Mac. So from where we're coming at this is we're looking at the 3 different types of interaction. You've got student-student interaction, you've got student content interaction, and you've got student-instructor interaction. And if you look at the research, you'll see that when you have all 3 of those, the students do better. The students learn more, the students retain more, the students meet the outcomes better, and they're more successful and they're more retained. If any one of those bubbles shrinks, then the other bubbles need to grow in proportion to make sure that those students are remaining engaged. So when we look at, and if we go back 15, 20 years, when we're looking at the beginning periods of online teaching, it was a distance education class was basically a correspondence class in which people were emailed things and then they emailed things back. And you still see the influence of that correspondence course model in a lot of classes today. People will put up videos and then they will have quizzes that are automatically graded, and then the students take the final. So what we've been working with in our area at IU, we have a fairly robust push for online education that is both quality in design and development, but also very, very interactive in the teaching. So we're looking at both student-faculty interaction, that the faculty are in there interacting with the students. They're not being lazy. That they're providing opportunities for students to actively interact with the content. They're not just saying, here, read this. But they're providing this kind of scaffolding and the kind of ongoing feedback and support for students to process that information, whether individually or in small groups. And then the student-student interaction, which can be very difficult in a law school because of the competitiveness. I mean, how many of you are in institutions where grades are curved, where automatically grades are curved? Yeah. So what is the impetus for students to collaborate with each other when everything's a competition? So those are the kinds of things that we have to look at when designing that student-student interaction into law school classes, because they're looking at this as a competition, whereas when they get out into agencies, they're doing that kind of collaboration with other lawyers. They're providing research for other people to be successful. But they're coming into this in a very competitive model. So, as from the perspective of the design standpoint, what we try to do with the interaction is we start with the outcomes. We start with the learning outcomes for the course, and then we look at how you're assessing that the students have met those learning outcomes. And then we're looking specifically at interactions that can support students succeeding in these assessments and therefore meeting these outcomes. So it's not a matter of saying, oh, I think this is a really cool app, I think they should use this to do that, or I think that they should go talk about this in a small group. It's a matter of designing the interactions so that they provide educational benefit. So it's not a matter about bells and whistles, it's not about the tools, it's about providing opportunities for students to interact with each other, with the content, and with the instructor in a way that clearly supports the learning outcomes for the class. Because a lot of times when people try very honestly, very openly to promote interaction, but those interactions aren't focused and the students can't see the what's in it for me factor, then the participation drops. And there are students who will participate in everything because either because they enjoy it or because they're overachievers naturally. But by making everything as clear as possible, so you are going to participate in this interaction because it will help you do this, this, and this. But basically getting that out in front of the students. And yes, that's a lot more trouble, it's a lot more effort, it's a lot more work than just coming into a classroom and lecturing and giving them the stare that says, you go talk to each other and you go talk to each other because I'm looking at you. I can see what you're doing and not doing. But it's, I mean, as with all of online education, people look at it and they think, oh, it's this little thing, but it's bigger on the inside. So they get into it and they start thinking about how they're going to do these things. And at this point, we turn it back over to Cynthia and Max. We're going to talk about examples of what kinds of things that they've been doing.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about negotiations first. As I told you before, it's a hybrid course. I front load with a lot of online activity and information because what they're going to be engaging in this negotiation class is an extremely complex commercial type of transaction. So they need not only to get familiarized with this very complex problem scenario, but they also need to get familiarized with different concepts that are going to be very new to them, such as, you know, conducting a pre-negotiation strategy. What's a target point? What's a BATNA? What's a reservation point? All these different concepts. Concepts about identifying your own negotiation personality, how to identify the personality of the negotiation personality of the other party, how to deal with impasse, such and so forth. So there's a lot of front-loading of information that's going on. But I found in the past, before I did this online, it was sort of frustrating because I was just sort of info dumping onto them. I really felt that's what it was all about. And so with this hybrid course, I'm able to, with these different modules, set out for them in each module what the learning outcome is, why we're doing what we're doing, as well as engaging them interactively with whatever that learning, whatever that learning goal is for that particular module. A couple of things, a couple of tools. So I'm unpacking my toolbox. I've identified different learning outcomes that I want, and I had talked to Jeani about what it is I'm trying to accomplish, and she has, going back to that previous slide, informed me about getting this ratio, student to student, student to content, student to professor, and so we're talking about all this. And not each module is going to have the same approach. Everything's going to be a little bit different, and it's going to kind of custom fit into what would be the best way to have interaction in that particular module. So some of the tools that I've used in negotiations in this way, I have used ebook. How many of you have used an ebook on a course load or something like that? A couple of you. Okay. I was really excited about that. I don't know about you, but I was really excited about it when I heard about it. And so I took this test and we put it online. And what's so neat about course load is that you can, out to the side, in the margins, put your own notes, add little comments, put a link. do whatever, and the students in turn can add their own comments and questions and whatnot. And I will tell you though that by the time I completed the course of creating this course, I looked back at course load. You know what? You can have too many bells and whistles, right? And I felt like this was one that I could easily put aside. So even though it seemed like a really nifty tool to begin with, I ultimately decided not to use it actively in the class. What I did use, because negotiations is so much about interacting with or observing an interaction between different people, a lot of the quizzes that I used, and I didn't use quizzes for each module, but when I did use quizzes, I often embedded in the quiz snippets from good negotiations that have occurred in movies and TV series and whatnot, and it fed into whatever the topic was. So identify what type of negotiation, is this a power-based negotiation, interest-based negotiation, what is this, you know, that type of thing. Or I would embed a typical interaction between two characters and say, identify the negotiation personality of these people. Students enjoyed it because, you know, you had that little media interaction there, but it was nice because they got immediate feedback after they were finished with the test, and it was quiz, and it was timed. That they got immediate feedback of what they got right and what they got wrong. And along with that, I had indicated to them why something was not the correct answer, why something was the correct answer. In addition to that, you could even add, I didn't do that with this particular sets of quizzes, but you could even have them reference them back to the text or the discussion in your video presentation or whatever it is, to have them read or refresh their memory as to why that was the correct answer. You could also perhaps have a quiz where they have to score 100% before they can move on. Or they could take it as many times as they want, but you know, have different variations of it so that they can retest if necessary. The other big thing that I did with this group is it was very important to me that they understand pre-negotiation strategy. So we did sort of a game about charting. How do you chart out a negotiation strategy? And I imparted that to them on a video. I showed them the different concepts. Then what I did is I created this exercise, very short exercise of a negotiation on a non-compete. And they were asked, they only represented one side of the party, and they were asked to use this chart, use these concepts to chart out what they felt were the issues, the interests, the positions, all this stuff on this little chart. And then when they submitted the chart, they immediately got back a model answer. After they received the model answer then, they were asked, again, back to this complex simulation that was going to take many hours for them to negotiate. They were asked to start charting their pre-negotiation strategy for that complex negotiation, which was ultimately going to take place down the road, and which, in fact, I was going to grade. That initial attempt, that non-compete attempt, was a pass-fail assignment. This was a graded assignment. But they get immediate feedback, and that's what I liked about that. Some of the other things that I did, I broke the group into two. So one represented one particular corporation, another represented another corporation. Groups of 6 to 8 each were in these groups. I created on my LMS site, I created two small mini groups. So two small mini sites within that site where they could collaborate and do their confidential discussions and whatnot with each other all online. And they took a great deal of advantage of that, not only at the beginning to get to know each other and introducing themselves to each other pre-negotiation, but also during the negotiation. We had a lot of breakout sessions, and a lot of them could have occurred on Zoom, Skype. I was there. I sat in on these things. They did a lot of collaboration with correspondence, strategy plans, sharing background information on the deal, and so on and so forth. And I found that extremely successful, more so than when I was conducting this as a fully live class. Finally, what I did is, when they interacted in the negotiation, we taped the entire negotiation, which often ran for 2 hours, sometimes 2.5 hours. It was very complex. And we had 4 to 5 sessions of this negotiation. And they were asked to look back on, review this recording, look back on what they've done, what they did, what was their participation, how to reflect on their own roles, but also reflect on other students' roles in the negotiation. Out of which, this was part of a reflection diary that they kept, that in the end was also part of the grade for the course. So there was also this opportunity to reflect as well. Participation, as far as this online participation and whatnot, and even live participation, that was about 35%, maybe I'm going to maybe boost it this year to 40% of the final grade of the course. The rest of it was all this other stuff that I've just mentioned to you, the online quizzes, the preliminary chart, the preliminary reflection, all that business also went into it. But this interactive participation was a big part. And funny enough, I just want to say one more thing and then I'll let Matt stop. I thought that, it never was an issue for me that participation was important in this course, that it was an important part of the grade for this course. But when I got to the contract drafting, I didn't stop to think how important that was as a percentage of the grade in an online course. And when I was sitting down with Jeani, she looked at me and she said, well, how much of this is going to be participation? I said, what do you mean? I got quizzes here, I got, what are you talking about? She says, no, other stuff. You've got to have a real participation grade here. And it needs to be, what, 20 to 25%, you said something like that.
Varies.
Yeah, but it needs to be a real part of your online experience. Otherwise, you're going to give all these bells and whistles, exciting exercises, and the students are going to blow it off. So, next.
So, start with the mea culpa, because I feel like talking about asynchronous versus synchronous, we left that with me saying asynchronous is the best way to do it, and those of you doing synchronous are not doing it right. That was not the intent. The point is that Cynthia and I, for our particular courses, found asynchronous to be very helpful. But I think this is a question of what works best given the kind of course you're designing and the way in which you plan to teach it. So I think that nothing we're saying, I think, is poo-pooing one versus the other.
I just want to jump in on one point related to that. There's nothing that says you can't have an primarily asynchronous course with synchronous stuff in it. Because that's what a lot of the faculty that I'm working with that are not in the School of Law are doing, whether they're doing, it's an asynchronous course, but they'll meet once a month for a couple of hours to either work through something as a group, or they'll have a guest speaker come in and speak over point to multi-point video conferencing, or they'll just have open office hours where people can come in video and talk to them, or if they've got them broken down into small groups for another activity, they'll schedule to meet individually with those small groups on video conference. So there's a lot of room for doing synchronous within asynchronous and still keeping that flexibility.
So back to interaction within this room, right? So we've all agreed that we all know what online teaching is, and we have some view on the type of online teaching that we think of when we tend to think of the term. How about what kind of course are people most familiar with or think about? Is it the skills writing style courses that people think about most? Any hands on the skills writing side? See, this is intriguing to me. So we have a couple. Cynthia's doing, of course, a lot of this work, and which we're very excited about, because in particular in the business curriculum, which is another place where I hang my hat, to have Cynthia's work in contract drafting and negotiations online is a tremendous boon for us. But much of what we see online tends to be, I think, in the classic doctrinal theoretical. How about seminar versus, well, I will call it, even though it sounds judgmental, hard-hitting doctrinal. The seminar courses, is that something people play with much? Think about. So hard-hitting doctrinal, is that kind of where everybody's thinking? It's you're teaching like evidence or tax or?
It's hard-hitting doctrinal with shrinking credits.
With shrinking credits? Explain it.
When I first started teaching contracts, I got 6 credits.
Yes.
Now I get 4.
No. Yes, right.
I get them in the fall when you're doing anything.
You're being phased out slowly, right? Yeah. Well said. So we're talking, of course, about 2 kinds of courses, skills and seminar. Our idea is to circle back towards the end here and think about how what we're saying is applicable across the curriculum, how some of these ideas of interactivity are things you can draw into other courses as well. The one thing that I did that I was thrilled about in my seminar course was a pure accident. We were experimenting with different ways to get students introducing themselves because I wanted to recreate the feeling of the seminar room. I wanted first name conversation. I wanted them to talk to me using my first name. I wanted people to come in and say hi and how was your weekend before they started the class, even though we're asynchronous online. I wanted all those things to occur, so I insisted on upfront introduction of oneself. Well, that's a pretty common phenomenon, right? You have to introduce yourself at the discussion board or something. We were experimenting with different technologies to do this. One way was a classic discussion board. Another way was what we call voice thread, which is just a branded way to record your voice and have it. When I did the PowerPoint, it said introduce yourself, and you could record your voice and everybody could hear it. And voice thread was the particular technology we used. So students did that too. And the third way was send Huffman an email talking about who you are, and then I will circle back to the discussion board and try to introduce you to each other and that kind of. So by the time they were done with this, and each of those were worth a point. They're all worth points in the students are like, they're now spending time in the discussion board making fun of me for having brought them through this three-step process to do the same thing. It's entirely we've done the self-introduction process. The result being, they're all great friends and I'm this joke over here, which was perfectly fine with me. Like, I will recreate that deliberately the next time around because it got students so engaged with each other. And again, in my particular class, we were dealing with students from 4 different law schools in 6 different geographic locations. So it was particularly exciting to see the students studying abroad in the Netherlands hanging out with my student at Jeani online. They never would otherwise have met, but they're either friends or they actively friends, at least for the duration of the course. The self-introduction process, I think, is incredibly key, and I think making it with points was something that I would clearly do again. Interaction between the professor and the students, I found the quiz process, this is going to sound almost trite, because we all know it and it's been said about 14 times so far in this Academy conference. The notion of quizzes with feedback from the professor was an incredible way to get my interaction to them, and the students loved it in the reviews. Every mid-semester request for review I put out to the students, and the final student reviews on the quizzes were incredibly positive. It gives them a sense of they get the material. It gives me an excuse to get back to them and say, gee, you didn't get this, or you got this very well, or should we talk about this? It's an entree to further discussion. It lets me pair them together and say, a few of you are all in the same boat on this. Maybe you should be sharing some discussion about whether this particular thought. So you can, so long as you're careful about doing it and not embarrassing anybody, you can pair people together when they have common issues. The quiz process was an incredibly effective one that I cannot see ever putting a course together without doing. Multiple formative assessments with professor feedback.
What did the quizzes test?
They tended to test pure comprehension of the reading or other sort of video lectures or other material that was on the course website.
Do you worry? I'm going to ask this in a loaded way, so please take it apart and answer it in a non-loaded way.
Yeah.
Do you worry that by linking your learning outcome to read for my quiz, that you're not linking it to the skills you want them to have, but they're just doing the reading for the quiz and then it's not connected to the rest of class material?
So I would worry if the quiz was too heavily weighted. But I don't worry too much because the quiz is not heavily weighted. They tend to be incredibly small, low value. Did you actually get through the material enough to do it? And you're right, it's possible, for example, for the students to share answers in the quiz. You can play with some techniques in the LMS to avoid that, switch the questions up and such. So I would worry if it wasn't that the ultimate points tended to be in the discussions and we had a final paper in this class, it being a seminar class.
Thank you.
Does that help? Yeah, it's a fair point. In other words, the goal of this class, being a seminar, is not to know a bunch of material. The goal of this class is to discuss well, to speak fluidly about, to write well about, to engage in complex research about the material, and the process hopefully learning a fair amount of it. But if a student doesn't memorize a particular rule of law, I'm okay with that. What I'm not okay with is a student who's not thinking deeply and analyzing the process. So you do got to be wary of that. Peer review process in my course was incredibly effective. Now you have to teach students to do that. In other words, you have to have several different peer review steps because the first time around, all they have to do is reading the paper and saying, oh, good job, slap on the back. And they think that's okay. And then you got to get back to them and say that was not an effective peer review. Incidentally, although you think you're being nice, you're not. You're not helping your colleague out in the process of writing the paper. And so you have to write 2 rubrics. One's a rubric for their peer review process, The second is my rubric for their peer reviewing of the other, right? Did you engage in a peer review in a fashion? And then you have to build that over 2 or 3 instances at least of use. So the first time around it was almost no points, I'm just getting back to them and saying, nice work, try again. The second time around, okay, that was worth a couple of points. The third time around, this is a serious, heavily weighted assignment worth, 5–10% of the grade. To peer review well the final or the near final draft of your colleague's paper. And in doing so, I hope A, you learn both the content, B, you learn the editing process, which by the way is a very important lawyering skill, and C, your colleague gains something dramatic from the peer review process. And there's where you create sort of almost real friends. You pair these people together for 3 different peer reviews, and next thing you know, they are actually collaborating on things outside of the class. There was a hand that I missed. No? Okay.
I do have a question. How do you do the peer reviews? Do you have them set up FaceTime? Do you have them do it just via email with comments and track changes? How do they?
So there were a few answers. The way I did it was I built rubrics with a separate assignment into the learning management system. So I loaded up a rubric. I didn't set them all here. I loaded up a rubric for the peer review process.
And then there was. We're using Canvas, which has a built-in peer review system in the LMS. So you can pair people up. It will pair people up randomly. You can manually pair people up. You can pair them up into pairs or 3s or 4s, and they can review multiple papers. You can build in rubrics in those, and they can use the speed grader function within Canvas to use those rubrics to give people feedback on there. So it's it's baked into the LMS.
That's the right answer. I didn't do that. I should have done it. This would be more elegant. What I did was create a separate assignment, gave them the thing. I then had a rubric for my separate assignment. So each time there's 2 assignments. There's turn your paper in, there's peer review the paper, separated week to week. And I'm pairing the students up myself for the peer review based on their paper topics. So the peer review I found incredibly effective.
So I haven't done this in a seminar, I won't just online stuff with my larger classes, but I'm curious, and to me the thing that is the most valuable about the seminar is the interaction among the students.
Yeah.
And I have my students not just look at each other's papers,
Right.
I have them get up for 5 or 10 minutes the 4th week of the semester and talk about what they're going to write about and give one another feedback on that. And then I have them late in the semester get up and actually present what they've written about so far and where they're going, and give one another feedback on that, and devote a couple of class periods to each of those exercises.
Yeah.
How do you do that online?
So fully agree. Let me try to discuss my discussion boards and see if that gets part of it, because you're right. This is a tremendous part of the process. So discussion boards, right, again, a rather trite technology that we've all used 1,000 times. Another thing to teach students to do well. It isn't something they automatically do well. They think they say, me too, or I agree with what Joe over there said, or you're all just wrong. Or they also think they discuss at 11:59 p.m. when the deadline is midnight, and then the discussion board's done. So you have to talk them through that process over several iterations as well, including things like a discussion board post only counts if it is substantive. Okay, that's easy. A second would be a discussion board post. The points for this includes coming back and responding to the responses to your post, so you engage with each other on the various posts. And you can even say that a meaningful week-long discussion requires you to be in there 3 or 4 times over the course of the week. And again, you can build a rubric that will describe this. I think, though, that you have to walk them through a few instances before they're worth a lot of points. And the last is, toward the end of the semester, I now have the students leading the discussion board. So I say, you group, you're writing on, this is comparative international competition law, you're writing on abuse of dominance in foreign jurisdictions in the comparison with the U.S. Section 2 of the Sherman Act. Standard for predatory pricing or otherwise. Whenever those topics come up in the reading, you're in charge of the discussion board posts on that. Manage the board, work, keep the conversation flowing. And having observed the progression of the boards, I hope the students are doing a good job of this. Now, not quite the same thing as presenting your paper, but at least we've now created content experts or semi-content experts who are now leading the class in a way that I hope they will do when they get out in practice, right? They wrote that part of the summary judgment brief. They now talk the team through it in the process of preparing to file the brief, or whatever the example may be from in practice. So I think we can get some of that, but again, it is a process of, you have to decide, knowing how to discuss this topic is a learning outcome. And we will now build to that knowledge over the course of the entire semester. And by the end, again, tooting my own horn, I think it went pretty well. I think it went pretty well. The first time were a disaster. You had this a whole lot of individual emails of students saying, yeah, this doesn't cut it. You can't just send off a post at the last minute and say you agree with everybody else. You've got to actually contribute something here.
So can I toss in something about the presentation side of that?
Oh.
Depending on how you're doing your class, what system you're in, you can have students record and embed video in a discussion forum. So they can record a video of themselves presenting what they're going to write about or presenting their paper, and then put that in the discussion forum, and then the discussion flows from that video, either with other people posting their own video reactions to that or just in text. Or another tool that we've been using, VoiceThread, which Max had used. Students can post their video of their presentation in VoiceThread, and then students can leave either video, voice, or text comments around that video. And VoiceThread is a free tool, but it's with limitations. But some schools have adopted it more enterprise-wide. And there are other tools that do that too, but those are the top one. That's the top one that we've been using.
So I took a class that was a mixture of synchronous, and the teacher actually had us do presentations live through technology where you can share screens now, and you can have them share their presentation on one screen. You can have their webcam capture them face, and then they could hear us, so they could make comments. They could also chat comment at the same time. So there's technology. Google Groups does it very well. I have meetings all the time with Google Groups. Hangouts, yes, sorry.
A very cool example of outcome-driven design choice, right? We think that this is something you can't replace synchronous, so let's put it in there as necessary to make this work. I like that. I think that's better than what I've been doing. The one last thing, which is a heuristic that I've used in my course design, I think I'll come back to it, although Jeani has some questions about how good this is. Someone said to me you should use the 2-2-2 rule. And the idea is you want students to come to the course website and engage with the material at least twice a week. Right? The more time between engagement than that is too long for students. So at least twice a week. And it should be for at least some non-de minimis period of time. So the other two is 2 minutes. Now Jeani thinks that's de minimis, so she's not joining with me on that term. But something at least they can come on and look at the material and think about, oh yeah, comparative international competition law, there's where things are on that, right? So they come back for the non-de minimis period of time. And the last two points, make it worth a low value, just enough points that like incentivizes them to come in and actually engage with the material and do something. But not so many points that it is going to plunk their grade if something goes wrong in the process. You want them to feel comfortable engaging. So the 2-2-2 rule to me is a way of envisioning students. I've got a 13-week semester. Right, 26 times at least they're online doing something in my course. Which, by the way, when I've taught this live, this seminar, I'm not confident you get that. I know I get 13 times because they show up in class 13 times. But if I can put in place a mechanism that I know that they are engaged at least 26 times through the semester, that to me is an improvement over what I can do live, seeing the time. Cynthia?
Yeah. I'm just going to add a couple of things because I think we've covered about everything that I also use in my course. A couple of other thoughts here with regard to the contract drafting course that I'm thinking about doing and actually going to do in one particular instance. Getting back to that 2-2-2, I actually require them to do at least 2 interactive type of activities every week. In addition to just looking at my video presentation, which is very short, by the way, I'm asking them to come back and do something interactive every week, whether it's a discussion forum, part of the discussion forum, part of an exercise, quiz, drafting, pass-fail type of drafting attempt, whatever it is, they're going to be there at least 3 times during the week, and they got definite deadlines of when these things are due. I am asking my students, because contracts, you can't draft a contract without understanding governing law. I actually have my students pair up into 2s and do research connected to the drafting assignment, the large contract drafting assignment. We do two per semester. That I ask them to go out, research, say, confidentiality clauses in Colorado. What are you coming up with? What does it have to say? What do we have to be mindful about when we're drafting the confidentiality clause? For example, I'll have 2 people go out, do the research, and then videotape, present this online, and then the other students have to come back in and respond to it, either with questions, comments, whatever else it might be. So throughout the semester, I'm sprinkling these little research reports throughout the semester. So it's not every week I'm doing the same old, same old. The other thing that I've decided to do is mind map. Mind map, often students don't understand the interrelatedness between contract clauses. They don't understand how a confidentiality clause can be affected by an indemnification severability clause or a force majeure clause. So I'm going to have them engage in exercise where they're actually going to mind map how these clauses interact with each other. And I think that's going to be an excellent way to get students to understand this interrelatedness, because when they, time after time, I'm always seeing this very, well, here's the severability, here's the confidentiality, and they're not really understanding how all these can interact together, and I'm hoping that will bring it home. Finally, the one thing that I might also be embedding is action. Every once in a while in my videos, give the little, quick quiz, feedback, comment. And we'll see how that works, but it's not something that I've done thus far, so we'll see how that works. One more thing, we're working on a storyline exercise, right? And we're going to unfold this kind of like deal, and they're going to have to, through this storyline exercise, identify the appropriate contract provision that this agreed term has to be expressed in, and so on and so forth. So I'm hoping that also will be a very creative and valuable exercise. That's all I want to say right now.
Can I yield to finish up? Okay. All right. So we've really covered all of it in the general discussion. Is generally the themes that have come out from me working with a variety of professors in the law school, as well as people outside the law school, but specifically within the law school, is helping faculty think about what it means to interact with content. Because you can say, I have many people saying, well, I give them this book to read, they're interacting with the content because they're reading the book. Or I made this video and I put it out there and they're supposed to watch it, therefore they're interacting with the content. And it's a matter of helping them to understand the difference between passive and active learning. You can sit there and have ESPN running on your TV in your lobby all day, and you will have absolutely no idea what happened when you left there, because you're not really paying attention. It's there, you're kind of watching it, but it's not really entering your brain, and you're not really thinking about it, and you're not really processing it. So what kinds of things that they need to think about to ensure that students are actively working with the content. We talked about grading participation. The matter of when you're starting the class, and Max touched on this a little bit at the very beginning of the semester, setting expectations. Setting expectations for the students through the course introduction, the course overview, through the syllabus, that they are expected to participate actively in this community of learners. And being able to not just put that as a piece of syllabus language, but then actually reinforcing that expectation throughout the semester. And reinforcing that expectation by having the faculty member actively participating also, giving feedback, moderating discussion forums. And I have faculty who say, well, I can't do discussion forums. I have to reply to every single post that every single person made, and it would take forever. And it's a matter of coaching them to understand that you don't have to respond to every single post that every single student made, because by doing that, you're inserting the instructor's voice to the detriment of allowing students to converse with each other and allowing students to think through things with each other. So my general rule of thumb is a third. If you have a discussion forum in which you're asking students, so say you're giving them a case law, you're giving them a situation, you're asking them to apply the law to the situation, and then provide what feedback that they would give the client who was in that situation. What counsel would you give the client in this situation? Work together in your small groups to come to consensus about what would be the best path of action for this client given the situation. If you're in there, the faculty member is in there responding to every single post that every student makes, then they aren't able to explore the concept themselves. They aren't able to question each other. They aren't able to get into thinking through some of the larger issues because they keep looking, once you set the precedent, they keep looking to the instructor for the right answer. And part of what you're trying to get them to do in law school is to think for themselves and to think through things logically and consistently and to look for the sources and to look for the evidence. Not to all, because there's not going to be a professor giving them a right answer when they're out in practice. So working with faculty to help them see the limits of what they could be doing to scaffold the students in the discussion forum without actively taking over the discussion forum because they think that's what they have to do to actually participate with the students.
Wait, so what's 1/3?
For faculty who feel they really need to respond to everything, I say no more than 1/3 of the posts.
Okay.
So if they really feel the need to go that far, no more than 1/3 of the posts. And what I like to encourage faculty, especially when they're working with students in smaller groups, is maybe pop in a couple of times to each group, ask them some Socratic questions, point them to some sources, point them back to the course materials if they're getting off to the side somewhere, and then come circle back round at a reasonable point, maybe at the end of the week, maybe a little bit before the end of the week, depending on what you're asking them to do, and summarize and say, I've seen a lot of people doing X, and this is really good, but you should also consider looking at Y. And nobody's mentioned Z. So maybe as you're looking at this, you need to look at it from the perspective of Z and see how that would impact how you're doing X and how you're doing Y. But doing that at a more global, in a more global way, and if I can get them to do it on video. So get used to doing little, short, in the moment, maybe 5-minute max video responses to what the students are doing in their groups, in their forums, what they're doing on their quizzes, what kind of trends are you seeing in what they're doing, or on current events. So we're talking about we're talking about a specific kind of negotiation, and there's something that's come up in the news relating to mergers and acquisitions and negotiating in that area. You can have a little bitty video discussing, just talking about what you see in this case and how it ties into what's going on in the course. For those who are scared of video, don't want to be on camera, they can have a current events discussion forum and post these kinds of things in that discussion forum, and even encourage or require students at some point over the semester to post a current event along with some discussion about how it connects to what they're doing in the class. Yeah, I think we covered everything else that we were going to do.
So if I have two follow-up thoughts about this, everything Jeani is saying and everything Cynthia is pointing out in her class, and I hope some of the things I said, I hope demonstrate that the building process for the asynchronous class is where everything is done. You're engaged throughout the semester, interacting. Yes, you can't be the lazy faculty member who disappears, but there is, in the case of my course, a full 18 months of going from, gee, what do I want to accomplish here, to here's a course that's ready to roll out that achieves all of these, has all these various, Cynthia's term, bells and whistles that achieve this interactivity mission. So the building process is incredibly intense for asynchronous. There's where I think that this is, where the rubber meets the road as far as this being difficult and possibly very expensive. The second point, which I keep coming to it with listening to Jeani talk, is the reason I'm willing to say this is better than live is you have your live discussion and you know what goes well because you're there and you're engaged and the students are engaged and everything. But how are you actually monitoring the students, the quality of their responses, the level of actual sort of substantive interaction they're getting? Are you sitting there making check marks every time a good point is made? Do you have your research assistant watching from the back of the room and writing things down? Are you videotaping the class? Whereas asynchronous online, everything we're talking about is captured in the LMS, and you can go back and review everything that happens. When I grade the course at the end, I go back and look at every instance of the student's engagement with me, themselves, the material, and you can truly defensively assign a grade to interaction in a way that I've never felt confident doing live. I think I can make a subjective judgment live, but the fact is it is subjective. Here online, I'm making a relatively objective judgment about the quality of the students' actual engagement.
With the recording of these negotiations, the students having to go back and review them, they actually go back and review them, I'm surprised, more than once. And we're talking about very lengthy recorded negotiations. And I can't tell you how many times I've had students come up to me or write to me and say, gee, I learned so much out of this. I didn't realize I was doing this, you know, the emotional moment, and I didn't realize it, and even 24 hours later, I don't. But, you know, thereafter, I go back and return to it. Now I'm beginning to see what everybody's talking about, or I'm beginning to see why this person did so well and why I need to do better, or this is a pitfall I need to avoid. That ability to go back and review. But the other thing I really want to be careful about when I'm designing my own courses is I tend to get down this rabbit hole, and I'm telling Jeani, I want this, I want that, oh my gosh, you know, I'm like this cat with the, you know, little tinsel trying to think, oh yeah, that's great. I have to be very careful not to get caught up in the bells and whistles. I have to be very careful that I am maximizing the quality of interaction the students are having, and is this the appropriate tool to do it with?
So all that said, in the last 5 minutes, let's interact. Thoughts, comments?
I have a question, but I think we already answered part of it, which is how long did it take you to build this class?
In my particular case, it took 18 months. Now, that is not 18 months of building a class. That's why I'm obviously full-time teaching and writing on top of that. But yeah, so is that your experience as well?
It took a very, very long time. A lot of hours. Incredible.
The fastest we've seen done working in a partnership, actually, let me throw one last plug. If you can come back in 30 minutes, we've got a second session where we're talking about the partnership with ourselves and with the designers. The fastest we've seen it done in that partnership setting is about 1 semester. Someone gets started and the class can go live the following semester.
So what is the frequency of the update going to be? Like, for example, next semester, do you think you need to change?
I am constantly tweaking.
Every time I teach?
Yes, every time I teach I'm tweaking. I'm going back, I'm doing this thing now here in a few weeks in negotiations again. And I taught it twice last year, I'm tweaking it again this year. I'm trying to make it better and better all the time.
Yeah.
And earlier you mentioned this is a hybrid class?
Yours has been
Mine
hybrid.
is, my negotiations class has been hybrid.
And in the hybrid class, do you have a remote student as well?
Do you have remote students in negotiations, or they all
There's a backstory.
There is a backstory that I won't
I'm
get
asking
into. I did I was going to do international negotiations with a school outside of this country, and we went through tons of hours of trying to get everything synced and whatnot, and some political upheaval. Who would have guessed it? In that situation. So I can't tell you, but we were going to do halfway across the world.
I'm asking because one of our faculty, she's doing a hybrid class, and we have out-of-state students, and during the classroom time, she's using Blackboard, and they are watching, but she's muting their mics, and they cannot comment during the class. But the student next to her can comment and ask questions.
Yeah. What Cynthia was doing with negotiations is they have, it's a condensed it was a condensed summer class, started this all, and they were simply coming together for 2 weeks, face to face, to do this in-depth negotiation where they were going every day, all day, every day for 2 weeks. So it's more like an executive kind of a thing. But yeah, they would do that. With the other institution, we would have brought them in on video, and they would have gathered together on video, their team, and then Cynthia would have gathered together her team, and we would have done video back and forth with the teams.
If I were to do what you're describing, I would choose to make that asynchronous, synchronous combined, because it seems to me that what you just described sounds a little unfair, and perhaps not perfect for the non-professionals.
Yeah, I managed the multimedia at University of Richmond School of Law, and we did a synchronous online course with Bocconi in Milan, Italy. And it was very interesting, but especially because of some of the time difference and the scheduling differences. Like they take a really long Easter break, and I think some of the asynchronous stuff built in. If we had maybe recorded videos for that, it may have actually gotten some of the course material through a little better.
And that's what we did. We actually did that, front-loaded, and then we were doing this other stuff, synchronous.
But they use chat forums a lot.
Yeah,
and very.
you really gotta be extremely careful if you're doing anything engaging with, especially a country that isn't quite up to speed with their technology. You've gotta really have your tech person and their tech person, and we had multiple sessions where we were test running the syncing of it and all.
But your experience with Italy was very positive, it sounds like.
It was very
But for
positive.
some scheduling issues, yeah.
And they had actually 3 people helping the professor, where it was, for me, it was just me. I was always in the classroom because it was the first time we've done something like this.
Oh, exciting.
And we're using H323 Polycom kind of stuff rather than Google Chat, which you could also have done it that way. But just another thought I had while you were talking was that, you know, it's kind of, it should be obvious that you could take a lot of the meta communication that you're using in how people are going to interact and introducing themselves and bring that back to the actual in-classroom stuff. And there's stuff that you're doing that some professors aren't doing in real life classes.
The feedback loop into live teaching has really been incredible. It's really been nice, yeah. I will observe the time just because I know Brandon's probably out there, but let's not stop the good conversation if it keeps going.